Hello, I'm TMN, and welcome to today's movie review. The Hobbit. The beloved children's book about the resilient Bilbo Baggins, who travels with Gandalf the Grey, Thorin Oakenshield, and his band of dwarves to reclaim their lost kingdom of Erebor. It's whimsical, charming, and a great read for all ages. Now, doesn't that just sound like something that should be exploited into 3 films? Ah, yes, I remember it like it was yesterday. The day when it was announced that Peter Jackson would finally be directing The Hobbit. Now, keep in mind, it had been roughly 8 years since The Lord of the Rings, Return of the King had come out, so I think all of us Middle-earth fans were pretty much peeing in our pants with excitement. Little did we know that this soon-to-be film would eventually turn into a 2-parter, then a 3-parter, in the span of no less than 5 years. Thanks, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows! But who knows, maybe there is some advantage to making 3 movies out of The Hobbit. After all, the book itself is roughly 300 pages, and therefore if you translated each page of the book as 1 minute of film, that would still make the film 5 hours long. But when you consider that the Hobbit trilogy as a whole, including the extended editions, would be about 9 hours long, that pretty much means there's 4 hours of wasted time. But nonetheless, over the next 3 days, I'm going to be taking a look at each of the individual films in the Hobbit trilogy and ask the question, was it worth it? And to start off, we have The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey.
Why, Bilbo Baggins? Perhaps it is because I'm afraid. And it gives me courage.
We begin the Hobbit trilogy with The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, which in my opinion is probably the most faithful adaptation compared to the book of all 3 films. There's little to no fan service characters included, such as Legolas, and not to mention it actually focuses more on Bilbo's character as opposed to Thorin's, which gets way too much screen time in the other 2 films. I mean, the series is called The Hobbit after all. Do we really need to put all this focus on Thorin Oakenshield's character and his revenge on Azog? Well, anyway. I'll start off with performances, and whether you love or hate these films, I think most people can agree that Martin Freeman did a great job as Bilbo Baggins. I find that he really captures the essence of Ian Holm, and I really felt that he captured the wit and charm of the character from the book. He's probably the best part in the entire trilogy, and it's really sad that they don't focus on him as much as they should. Instead, we focus on characters like Thorin Oakenshield, played by Richard Armitage. Now, don't get me wrong, the performance is great and it's a great casting choice, but why do we need to know about his backstory? Now, despite only appearing in the Hobbit appendices, I get that they created the character of Azog for the Hobbit trilogy just for the sake of giving Thorin motivation. But wasn't the desire to reclaim their kingdom of Erebor enough motivation already? It would be like if in The Lord of the Rings, someone shot Aragorn a dirty look when he was a kid, so he spent like a quarter of the films trying to track down the guy's house to TP it. And isn't a giant dragon looming around in a cave that could wake up and kill them at any moment a much bigger threat than just some taller than average orc? I bet that if you took the entire Hobbit trilogy and edited out every single scene with Azog in it, the story would still make perfect sense. Ooh, I guess the threat of Sauron wasn't enough already. Oh yeah, speaking of Sauron, he's in these films. You know, in case you forgot they were part of the same universe. This movie has several instances, not too many thankfully, where they try to tie in the Hobbit trilogy with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I don't really mind them too much, but I don't really see the overall point. Hey look, it's Legolas! Lord of the Rings! Hey look, Frodo! Lord of the Rings! Hey, they said Gimli! Lord of the freaking Rings! Huh, Strider, he's talking about Aragorn! It's Lord of the Rings! Who, an evil and powerful enemy? They're talking about Sauron, which means Lord of the Rings! Yeah, I don't know why The Hobbit couldn't have just been its own thing. I mean, even the book itself is more of a children's book, and the Lord of the Rings trilogy is more adult-oriented. But instead, they're trying to turn The Hobbit into the Lord of the Rings. And in case you're wondering, because I have been rambling on a bit, I do like the other performances in this movie. Ian McKellen is still great as Gandalf, although sometimes it doesn't really look like he wants to be in the film. And I do enjoy all the actors they got to play the dwarves, with probably my favorite being Bofur. I like how they have their own little unique personalities and how you can recognize them by their different looks and their costume designs, you know, as opposed to making them all look like Gimli or something. And as geeky as it might make me sound, I'm probably one of the only people who could actually correctly name off all the dwarves just by looking at them. But I suppose that is one problem with the movie. You're probably not going to recognize any of the dwarves 10 minutes after they've been named. But apart from acting, how does the music do? Well, once again, Howard Shore returns from the Lord of the Rings trilogy to compose the music for the Hobbit trilogy. And it's not as good. I know we're only focusing on An Unexpected Journey at the moment, so I'm not going to go into what I think of the other two movie soundtracks yet, but as far as the overall music from The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey goes, the only one that's really memorable, the only one that stands out as being really epic is the Misty Mountain song. Though as much as I love the cinematic rendition of Far Over the Misty Mountains, I still have a very soft spot for the Mind's Eye radio version. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically a radio drama of The Hobbit. Now, I have a very soft, nostalgic spot for this particular audiobook, so I do have a bit of a biased preference. But as much as I love this,
far over the misty mountains cold,
I love this even more.
Far over the misty mountains cold.
But yeah, the rest of the music is pretty forgettable. Apart from cues that we've already heard in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, none of the music really stands out that much. I mean, come on, Howard Shore, you gave us great themes in Lord of the Rings, like the Hobbit theme, the Isengard theme, the Rivendell theme, and what do you give us in The Hobbit? But let's move on to something that people usually gripe on about these films, the CGI. And yeah, I have to admit, there is a pretty excessive amount of it. And as someone who prefers practical effects over CGI, it does annoy me a bit that you go from The Lord of the Rings, which has great use of such techniques, and then you have The Hobbit, which just looks like everything was done on a green screen. And even worse is when you watch the behind the scenes for these films, there are some cases where they were going to use a practical effect design for maybe like a goblin creature or something, and then in the end they decided to go with CGI anyway because it didn't look realistic enough. Okay, for anyone who says practical effects don't look as realistic as CGI, watch 1982's The Thing. I mean, wow. But as much as I gripe on about the CGI, I don't find it to be overly distracting. I mean, I can still enjoy the movie regardless. I mean, my brain can pretend that what I'm seeing on screen is really there, even if it isn't. And who knows, maybe the CGI is more prominent because of the 48 frames per second gimmick that is used in the Hobbit films. Of course, I don't see any difference between 24 frames per second other than the fact that I think 48 frames makes the picture look slightly blurrier and more glowy. If you've watched any of the Hobbit films, have you ever noticed that it kind of looks like they just smeared the film with Vaseline or something? I mean, the films look fantastic on Blu-ray, but, you know, it's still weird. But the final thing I'll talk about before I end this review is the adaptation itself. How does The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey compare to the book? Or at least as far along in the book as it's based on? Well, I think it does a great job. Not only does it actually focus more on Bilbo Baggins' character, but it more closely follows the book than the other two do. And I actually felt like I was watching the pages come to life, as opposed to... Hey, that wasn't in the book. And some people might complain that certain scenes go on too long. I mean, the adventure itself doesn't get started until about 45 minutes into the film. But I'm a sucker for Tolkien. The more Middle-earth we get to see, the more happy I am. This film is definitely not the most action-packed of the Hobbit trilogy, but since the books never really were action-packed, that's why I like it so much. Apart from unnecessary characters like Azog and the Necromancer being added, this film actually feels like a faithful adaptation of a children's book. Right from the beginning, before The Hobbit was even announced, I don't think there was ever a chance that it would be quite as successful as the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but for what it's worth, I still like it. It's got great performances topped by Martin Freeman, but it's got an average soundtrack. It captures the charm and adventure of the original book very well, but the CGI isn't that great. The Hobbit is definitely a mixed bag. And while I certainly enjoy it, I'm going to give The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. Well guys, that's it for today's review. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for my review of The Hobbit: The Desolation of Smaug. Leave a comment down below telling me your thoughts on the film. Don't forget to hit that like button, hit that little bell icon to be notified whenever I post. Be sure to share this video with your friends and family, and as always, subscribe. I'm TMN. Until next time.